So when people like us get together who care about documentation and communicating well, we love to talk about beginnings, about onboarding users, about getting developers up to speed, or about launching new products. And we like to talk about middles. We like to talk about troubleshooting, helping people solve problems better, how to advocate for new features, or how to scale up our tools and processes to help more and more people. But what we don't talk about so much is endings. We act like our software will live forever. But it happens all the time. Teams are reorganized, projects are discontinued, and companies go bust. And if you haven't worked on a canceled project yet, it's likely that you will someday. And it happened to me a few months ago. I was working on a project where the future looked bright, right up until it didn't. But even if you haven't been on a project like that, I have no doubt you've experienced this as a user. I got this email last month from CrashPlan about discontinuing their consumer backup service. And the thing is, I got this email, and I looked at it once, and it sat in my inbox, and it made me really anxious, because I have to find a replacement for this service. I actually have a whole year to sort this out. It's not an urgent problem. But And I'm not even knocking this. This is actually a really good email. They've done a really good job of communicating this change. But you know what a burden it is to get something like this. And you know how disruptive it is. And you know it has a sort of lasting sting to it. I can't be the only person who's still a little bit angry about Google Reader. So today I'm going to talk about what has to happen when the end is near. I'm going to talk about this to take away the threat and to help us find the way to make the best of an uncomfortable situation. And so this talk is about getting 3 things right. First, getting in the right mindset. Shutting down a product or service is a fraught situation, and so it requires a lot of sort of attention to yourself. Second, about getting your planning right. Having a plan is essential. This is not one of those things you get to iterate on. You have one shot to help your users move in an orderly fashion, and you don't really get a do-over. And third, about getting your message right. There's actually not a whole lot of content to write in a situation like this, but the content you do write requires a lot of attention and care. But before we get too kind of into the details here, I have a word on terminology. Shutdown is this really loaded word that I'm going to use throughout the rest of the talk. But there are other words that we use to sort of describe similar things. So you might be using euphemisms like sunsetting a feature, or retiring a product, or terminating a service, or deprecating a version. And for you, this might be a sort of normal part of the software development process. Maybe not an easy or comfortable part, but normal. So for you, maybe deprecation is a very simple process. Okay, we got version 1, we've got version 2. Version 2 has been around for a while, so maybe it's time to make the old one go away. But your users might interpret that word a bit differently. And to them, it may as well be the same as this big product-ending event. And so you can't really hide behind the fact that you've used a fancy word. So through the rest of the talk, I kind of want you to think about those events in the same terms as the shutdown that I'm going to be referring to through the remainder. So step 1 is to get yourself ready. There are lots of feelings about shutdown events, and they can get complicated. And we have a tendency to sort of let those feelings infect the way we communicate with our users. So for instance, you might be very happy. Maybe your company got acquired, and you have a big payday in your future, and the service that you've been working on is going away, but it's a boon to you personally. Or maybe you're relieved. Maybe a maintenance burden is finally going away, and this thing that has been a drag on you and your productivity is finally, you're going to be rid of that. Or you might be scared. Maybe your company is faltering, and you don't really know what the future holds. Or you might be angry. Maybe you worked on a project for a really long time, and somebody in management came down and said, sorry, we're not doing this anymore, and you feel like the rug has been pulled out from under you. And all of these are completely reasonable feelings, but they're not something you want to inflict on your users or your teammates. And so if you are going to help your users or your teammates, you need to get your head in the right place. And we talk about software if it's this rational, scientific thing, but you're not. And emotions are real, and you have to manage them. And so, or even if you are having an easy time with this process, it may be that someone that you work with is not. So the first thing to do in a situation like this is actually nothing. If you are able to, do not commit to any near future action. The more time you can buy yourself in this process, particularly early on, the better. Management may be imposing pressing deadlines. There may be external factors that are committing you to certain dates, but as you are able to, push back on those things, because this time very early on is going to be very valuable. It may be that you'll end up in a situation where you don't have a say, or that you can't slow things down. And that's okay. And so, but a lot of the advice that I'm going to have here is probably not going to be terribly useful for you. And maybe the better thing there is just to acknowledge that someone's decided to make you kind of miserable, and you have my permission to keep your head down and look out for you. But if you have time, integrate this new fact about your working life and digest it. So in those first few hours, you can go out with your team to a bar, and you can complain or celebrate or grieve, whatever the case happens to be. But then after that, I want you to go by yourself and sit down with a pad of paper and a pen, and I want you to write down everything you've learned and achieved working on this project. And this has two big benefits. First, it's just a useful exercise for your CV or resume, particularly if you are in a sort of hazardous situation where you're not sure if your job is long for this world. But the second thing this does is it turns this event into a process that you actually get to work on. So something has happened, and it happened to you, and now you're going to begin happening to it. The next thing I want you to do is to count your users. Take stock of your user base. How many daily active users do you have? How many API tokens have you issued? How many billing clients do you have? Maybe how many page views you're getting on your documentation. That is your audience. And for people who write documentation, this is a perversely big opportunity. It is not often that you have a chance to have this big an impact, where you have a large portion of your users that you need to create things for them that every one of them needs to see and understand. But when you look at those numbers, I want you to remind yourself that you are not your user. You're not your teammates, you're not your management, you're not your shareholders. I want you to acknowledge and respect that your experience is going to be different from those of your users and all the other people around you. And I want you to keep this idea in the front of your mind throughout this whole process, because it's going to be the thing that's going to keep you from making some kind of ugly mistakes later on. So once you've calibrated your expectations, it's time for step 2, which is to make a plan. And this is something you can't do by yourself. So I don't want you to do this in isolation. Your communications plan will necessarily be tightly coupled to the entire process of shutting down the software or service or product that you're working on. And so what you're going to do here is bring in all of your stakeholders. So you probably work with a support team, the people who are communicating with your users on a day-to-day basis. Or you work with operations people who are keeping the lights on, and those same people are going to be the ones that eventually turn it out. And you probably work with engineers, the people actually are making changes to the software. And you're going to need the input and the involvement of all of those people in this process to be able to plan your communications in time with the actual events that precede the end. The first thing that's going to go on that plan is to stop any existing outreach you're doing to draw people to your software. So you might have scheduled blog posts, you might have social media accounts that are running on autopilot, you might have drip marketing email that you're sending out, trying to upsell people. You might have advertising. And you want all of that to go silent before you actually make your formal announcement that your software is coming to an end, because you don't want to end up in the situation of talking at cross purposes to yourself. It happened to me once that I got an email about a service that I was using, and they said, okay, we're shutting down in 30 days, you have to migrate off, and okay, fine, like, bummer. But then about a half hour later, I get this email reminding me of their referral program, where if I convinced someone to sign up for 90 days, I would get a credit for future services. So you don't want to be in that situation. Next up, I want you to inventory all of the communications channels that you have with the people that are using your software. And you actually probably have a lot more of these ways than you think you do. And it's really important to know all of them and to start thinking about how they're going to fit into this process. Because you're not going to use all of them all at once necessarily, but it's likely that each is going to be involved. For instance, you might have an email newsletter. This might be the very first way in which you make this announcement of an upcoming change. You might have transactional email. You might have billing notifications. You might have quota notices, these sorts of things, where you might be able to insert reminders to people that, hey, this thing is coming to an end. You probably have blogs, like a regular sort of, a blog where you have long posts on various things. You might have a status blog. Each of these can be sort of turned toward making public pronouncements that might be available to people who aren't receiving your email, for instance. Social media accounts. Maybe your users aren't particularly good about reading their email, or they're not subscribed to your RSS feed. They might be watching your Facebook page. They might be subscribed to your Twitter account. Your support team likely uses lots of tools or routines that can be involved in this process. So, for instance, if a customer reaches out for help with a problem for a product that's going away, there may be a way for that support process to also use that as an opportunity to remind the users of what's coming. Sales can be really useful toward the very end of this process, where you're getting towards those hard deadlines, because sales account managers often have really strong relationships with individual users, and they can be important allies in reaching out to the stragglers. Your user interface can be a powerful tool for getting people's attention. It doesn't hurt to put a banner up saying, hey, things are changing. Your API. Now is probably not the time to engineer a non-critical, non-error notification system, but if you've already got something that will let you remind external developers of what's happening, you're going to want to take advantage of that. Events. If you're in a large organization, you might host meetups or conferences where you'll actually be in the room with people who are using your software. Again, another opportunity. And yeah, your documentation. There might be some people in the room who know something about that. I don't know. So you're going to want to include all of these channels in your escalation strategy. And it's going to look a bit like this, where early on there'll be a sort of a brief silence before you unleash this bad news on people. And there'll be a flurry of activity where you're making announcements on multiple channels. And then you'll likely drop back to a sort of a quieter but increasingly annoying period of reminders that things are changing. And then you'll have another burst at the end where you're going to engage a lot of those channels some more, and where you're going to help the last of your users who need to stop using your product or service or software. And then you'll go quiet. And you're going to want to map that escalation strategy onto a schedule. And it helps to start from the end and work backwards. So you likely have some kind of deadline that you're working with. That this isn't going to be a long, drawn-out process necessarily. And you're going to want to start by striking out all the days where you can't really do anything. So we're going to want to get rid of weekends. there's really no one's going to read your email on the weekend anyway. Same for public holidays. And if you or your teammates are going to have a lot of your time and attention somewhere else, maybe a lot of people are going on vacation, or maybe there's a big company offsite where you know you're not going to have time to devote to this project, get rid of those days too. And if you can be really generous to yourself, get rid of Fridays, because Friday. And then what you have left are the days where you can actually make big changes and make big announcements. And this sort of speaks to why it's important to buy a lot of time early on, because when you start getting rid of all the days where you can't do anything, you're left with very few where you can. And it helps to think of these as no earlier than dates. You want to think of points in time where you're going to end guarantees, not necessarily take a specific action. So for instance, you might be tempted to say, on the 28th, we're going to start deleting user data. Or rather, that we are going to delete your user data. And it's better to say that you're going to start doing that on the 28th, because it may end up being that that's a harder problem than you think it is. Or maybe you need to involve people in that process where that is going to get longer, and you don't want to necessarily make commitments to your users that you can't really keep. So for instance, if you have to delete that data, maybe you have to involve legal to figure out what data you're obligated to retain. So now that you've got a schedule, we're on the easy part. It's what to say and how to say it. And this is really the last 10% of the effort. There is not a lot of content to write, but it matters a lot in how you write it. So the main things to consider here, first is that you want to be calm. When you tell people about what is happening, when you are helping to guide them through this process, you do not want to incite a panic. This is a deliberate, planned event, even if it's not. Your users may be inclined to panic anyway, but you don't have to prime them to do it. You want to be gentle. If your house style calls for a jokey, friendly tone, now is maybe not the best time for that. You're making this big imposition on your users that you've sort of changed the world around them, and it helps to be aware of that and to treat your users with sort of respect for that situation. And you want to be direct. Subtlety is not your friend at this point. It may be that a word like transition or sunset or retire means something to you, but for your users, they may project a lot onto that or underestimate what that might mean. And so if you can be, the more direct you can be about what in concrete terms is going to happen, the better off you'll be and the better off your users will be. One thing I want to remind you again is that it is not about you. There's this cliche about startups where they make a product, they get enough traction, such that they get enough users to get attention of maybe a big giant tech company, and then that big giant tech company buys them, and they immediately shut down the project. And then they put out this blog post or they send out an email that says, "We've learned so much from you, but now we're moving on to bigger and better things." And they're really happy and excited, maybe legitimately, that's how they feel and that's what they want to say. But to the users of those services, it often reads as, "Wow, it's been so great to earn your business, so we could let you down like this." And so you don't want to be this. There's a whole blog, if you Google this phrase, it's a wonderful catalog of these sorts of messages. And it's not a catalog you want to be in. So what you do provide is the facts. So first you want to answer the question, what is happening in concrete terms? So you're going to stop billing your customers, perhaps. Maybe your API is going to stop responding to requests. Maybe support is going to stop answering the phone at some point. Whatever the real kind of concrete, real-world implications of your software going away is, that's what you want to address. Second, you're going to want to refer back to that schedule that you came up with your team. And give your users a really concrete agenda for when these things are going to happen. What are the major milestones? When is that billing, when is the last bill going to be issued? When is the API going to start returning 500 errors? When will support stop answering my email? And lastly, what does it mean for me? What do I have to actually do in this situation? And that's not necessarily going to be obvious, or rather, that's going to vary from product or services or software, depending on what your thing is. But in general, it's about giving your reader an exit. Like that airline safety briefing that you don't listen to, the nearest exit may be behind you. The situation may call for unorthodox or unusual behavior on the part of your users, and you need to alert them to that. If you want to look like a real class act, tell your users how to switch to that competing service that caused you to get rid of your thing. If you can give people a pathway to the nearest substitute, that's going to be a really powerful gesture to your users. Your users may ask why, and this is kind of a touchy area. You actually don't owe anyone an explanation. Retiring to drink Mai Tais on the beach is every bit as legitimate as running out of money. And you're an adult, you've made a decision, it's okay to just do it and to not really address why. If you want to say why, you can though. But it requires some care, and you need to be careful not to open a negotiation. That you've made this decision, you're following through, and you don't want to muddy the waters with hope. You don't want to end up in a scenario where you have users pleading to you like, oh, can I pay you this much to keep this around? Because at best, you're going to delay the inevitable. And then that leaves, but there is one last thing you do need to say, which is thank you. It's a funny situation. The worst case scenario is not a bunch of angry people. It's a bunch of people who don't care. It's a bit like public speaking. And for the users that are angry, saying thank you can go a long ways towards neutralizing those bad feelings. So don't forget this part. Aviators have a saying that a good landing is one that you can walk away from. This process will not be a lot of fun. I'm not saying it's a good time, but if you can get everyone out in a nice, orderly fashion, then you've done a really good job. And then there is only one thing left to do, which is to make another trip out to the bar with your teammates and raise a glass to your dearly departed software.